The land stretched out endlessly, the horizon melting into a line of soft blue where the sky kissed the earth. Out there, life looked vast and free, but inside the lonely ranch house, silence sat like a weight pressing against the walls. Ethan McGraw leaned on the porch railing, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes from the morning glare. He had built a life most men envied, acres of land, cattle enough to secure him for decades, and horses that responded to his call like loyal friends. But wealth was a poor substitute for warmth, and comfort never replaced the sound of a laugh drifting through the halls. Ethan had never married, though not for lack of offers when he was younger. He was a quiet man, shy in ways people mistook for pride, and the years had slipped away while he was too busy with work and too cautious with his heart. Now, nearing 40, his evenings were filled with silence so thick it sometimes made him gasp awake at night, feeling suffocated by something that wasn't even there. He remembered how townsfolk often called him, the Silent One. At gatherings he would stand at the edges, tip his hat politely, and leave before the music grew too loud. They thought he was cold, but the truth was simpler. He didn't know how to speak when no one truly saw him. What he longed for most wasn't company for the sake of it. It was someone who might notice when his hands shook after hours of mending fences, someone who might ask if he was tired, or smile just because he was near. But the ranch gave him cattle instead of comfort, and the wide open skies gave him space instead of love. On the other side of town, in a weathered little house that carried more shadows than light, Anna Hayes sat at her kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee. She had brewed 2 cups, as she had done every morning for 2 years, though only 1 cup was ever touched. The second sat untouched, a silent offering to the memory of her husband, James, who had died suddenly in a truck accident. Anna was only 26, far too young to wear widowhood like a second skin, but grief had no respect for age. She still wore her wedding ring, still kept James's boots by the door, still moved through her days like a ghost trying to mimic the shape of the woman she once was. Her neighbors whispered behind curtains, some in pity, others in judgment, saying she needed to move on. But how could she move on when every memory of him was stitched into the fabric of her heart? Loneliness had its own kind of sickness, and Anna felt it in her bones. Some mornings, she struggled to breathe, her chest tightening as though sorrow itself had weight. The doctor said it was grief, not illness, but still he wrote her prescriptions that barely dulled the ache. She filled them at the town pharmacy, more out of habit than hope. It was there, in that small place with shelves of bottles and the faint smell of antiseptic, that her path crossed Ethan's. She had fumbled with her purse and the paper bag of medicine, nearly dropping it to the floor. Before she could react, a large, calloused hand steadied the bag and placed it gently back in her arms. She looked up, startled, and met Ethan's gaze. His eyes were the color of storm clouds before rain, steady but soft, carrying the weight of someone who knew what silence could do. For a moment, the air between them shifted, like recognition had sparked even though they were strangers. Neither spoke more than a polite thank you, and yet the moment lingered with both long after they walked away. The following week, Anna heard a knock at her door. She rarely had visitors, and for a heartbeat she thought she must be imagining it. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there awkwardly, holding a basket filled with fresh eggs and a jar of golden. "Honey, figured you might need these," he said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. She hesitated, then stepped aside and invited him in. Their first conversation was clumsy, words few and far between, but there was something comforting in the quiet. He didn't push her to talk, didn't fill the air with pity. He simply sat across from her, hands folded around a mug of coffee, his presence steady like an anchor in a storm. What began as that single visit soon became a pattern. One week it was eggs, the next fresh bread, another time firewood stacked neatly on her porch. Ethan never announced his coming, yet he arrived just when the silence in Anna's house felt too heavy to bear. Slowly, the rhythm of his presence began to weave itself into her days. She found herself talking, first about little things, the weather, the state of the roads, and then, one evening, about James. She expected Ethan to grow uncomfortable or to change the subject, but he only listened, his eyes never leaving hers. When her voice broke, he didn't offer easy words. He simply reached across the table, his hand resting close enough for her to feel the warmth of it, but not so close as to push her. For the first time in years, Anna felt like she was being seen not as a widow, not as a tragedy, but as a woman whose heart was still beating. She noticed things about Ethan too. He carried himself with a quiet strength, but beneath it there was loneliness that mirrored her own. He spoke little of himself, but the way his eyes lingered on the horizon told her he had his own empty spaces, his own nights of silence pressing in. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Anna gathered her courage and asked him why he kept coming back. Her voice was small, hesitant, but her curiosity had grown too large to keep silent. Ethan took a long moment before answering, his gaze fixed on the fading light. Because I know what it's like to have silence as your only company. And I don't think either of us was meant to live that way. Then, almost as though the words slipped from him without planning, he added softly, doctor's prescription is you, 3 times a day. Anna blinked, startled by the phrase, and for the first time in 2 years, she laughed. It was a fragile sound, cracked by the edges of grief, but it was laughter nonetheless. Tears welled in her eyes, not just from the humor of his words, but from the realization that something within her had stirred awake. She didn't know what he truly meant yet, but the phrase clung to her heart like a promise. That night, as she lay in bed, she repeated his words silently, doctor's prescription is you. She wasn't ready to love again, not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she was ready to breathe again. The seasons shifted slowly, and with them, the rhythm of Anna's life began to change. Where once the days had stretched into long shadows of silence, they were now broken into moments marked by Ethan's presence. It started subtly, like drops of water carving into stone, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Every morning, just as the sun climbed over the fields, Ethan would arrive with 2 steaming mugs of coffee balanced carefully in his hands. He would hand one to Anna with the faintest of smiles, and sometimes, with a quiet jest, he would say, prescription number 1. She would roll her eyes, though a smile tugged at her lips, and sip the drink while the warmth seeped into her chest. It wasn't just coffee he brought, it was a reason to rise from bed, a reminder that she still had a place in someone's day. At noon, when the sun blazed down and the cattle wandered lazily across the fields, Ethan often stopped by again. Sometimes he came with sandwiches wrapped in cloth, other times he invited her to ride along in his truck as he checked the fences. Prescription number 2, he'd say, his tone dry but laced with a humor that made her heart lighten. Those afternoons often passed in companionable quiet. Anna found she didn't need to fill the air with words when Ethan was near, his presence was enough. He had a way of grounding her, of making even the simplest moments feel like balm against the ache she carried. And in the evenings, as the sky turned shades of lavender and gold, Ethan would sit on her porch with her. Sometimes they spoke of nothing at all, simply listening to the crickets begin their chorus. Other times, he told her stories of the ranch, how a stubborn calf had broken through the fence, or how one of the horses had chased off a coyote. Prescription number 3, he would murmur, handing her a cup of tea or simply sitting down beside her, his shoulders broad and steady, like a wall against the night. This pattern grew into something sacred between them. For Anna, it was proof that she had not been forgotten, that life could still move forward without erasing the past. For Ethan, it was a way to admit, without saying it outright, that he needed her as much as she needed him. The words themselves became a kind of vow, one that held more weight than promises written in rings or papers. But grief is not a straight path, and healing rarely comes without storms. One afternoon, while Anna was sorting through an old box in her bedroom closet, she came across James's belongings, letters he had written her, photographs where his smile still seemed to breathe, a shirt that still faintly smelled of him. The weight of it crashed over her like a wave, dragging her under. She sat on the floor, clutching the shirt, her tears falling onto the fabric until it was damp. When Ethan came by later that evening, carrying fresh bread from town, she snapped. "You need to leave," she said, her voice sharp and breaking all at once. Ethan froze in the doorway, his hand tightening around the paper bag. "Anna, no," she shouted, her face streaked with tears. "You'll never be him. You can't fix me. Don't you understand? I'm broken, and no amount of your prescriptions will change that." Her words cut through the air, harsher than she had ever spoken to him. Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice, when it came, was steady and low. "I'm not trying to replace him. I know I can't, I just don't want to see you disappear piece by piece." She turned away, hugging the shirt against her chest, sobbing as if her heart might crack open. Ethan stood there for a long moment, his eyes full of something between hurt and understanding. Then, without another word, he set the bread on the counter and quietly walked out. For 3 days, the silence returned to Anna's house, heavier than ever. The coffee mug sat untouched, The porch creaked without company, and every sound of the wind reminded her of what she had pushed away. She realized, with startling clarity, that his absence hurt more than her fear of moving on. She missed the steady knock at her door, the quiet way he listened, the comfort of his nearness. She missed the prescriptions that weren't medicine at all, but pieces of life given back to her in small, steady doses. On the fourth day, unable to bear it anymore, Anna went to the ranch. She found Ethan by the fence line, hammering nails into a broken post, sweat glistening on his brow under the harsh sun. He looked up, startled to see her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with a trembling voice, Anna whispered, "I don't want your prescriptions to stop. They're the only thing keeping me alive." The hammer slipped from Ethan's hand, falling into the grass. He walked toward her slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. When he reached her, he didn't say a word. He simply pulled her into his arms. For the first time since James's death, Anna allowed herself to rest against someone's chest, her tears soaking his shirt, her body trembling not with anger, but with release. Ethan's arms held her firmly, not in a way that demanded anything, but in a way that said he wasn't going anywhere. From that day forward, something shifted between them. The fear didn't vanish overnight, nor did the grief. But the bond between Ethan and Anna deepened in ways that words couldn't capture. She began to laugh more often, at first timidly, then freely, as though laughter had been waiting in her chest all along. She cooked meals again, sometimes inviting Ethan to share them, and found herself humming while she worked. He, in turn, began to talk more, opening up about his own losses, the parents he had buried too soon, the years he had wasted hiding from connection. They didn't rush, didn't label what was happening between them, but in the simple rituals, coffee in the morning, lunch at noon, tea on the porch at night, they built something stronger than either expected. The town began to notice, whispering about the widow and the silent rancher, but Anna no longer cared what people said. She felt alive again, and Ethan's eyes told her he did too. Years later, people would speak of them not as two broken souls who found each other by accident, but as two hearts that had saved one another, prescription by prescription, moment by moment. And though the phrase had started as a half-joke, half-promise, it became the truth of their lives. Healing came not from bottles or doctors, but from love lived out in steady doses, 3 times a day, and more, for as long as their hearts would allow.